It is the 26th of September, which means that only a few days ago Putin declared mobilization for a large part of his citizens in Russia. And I'm now in Daryali, on the border between Georgia and Russia. That border is actually just a few hundred meters behind me. And a lot of Russians are trying to cross the border right now. Chechnya and Ossetia is just on the other side of this mountain. And reportedly there's a traffic jam of 20 kilometers on the other side of cars are trying to get into Georgia. It's absolutely beautiful here, around 1500 meters above sea level. And I'm going to try to speak to some Russians that are just crossed the border and see how they've been, how long they've been waiting, and how they're seeing their future in Georgia. So I just met this Russian refugee, and he crossed the border with a friend. One of his friends was detained by the police, and this is all he could bring: toilet rolls, laptop, a small bag. And this is how I see most Russians crossing the border now. So I've been at this border crossing now for over an hour, and almost no one is willing to talk, or they're willing to talk but not on camera. Of course, if you're seen saying anything against Putin or Russia, then you come on a list. I just see a lot of relieved faces, but mostly also very tired. Yeah, waiting at the border for 20 hours, traveling to the border is not easy either. But yeah, happy faces. There are a lot of taxis here at the border. People are getting picked up, but also a lot of people came prepared and brought their bike. Because except for this border, there's nothing really here. So if you want to get away from this border, you need to know someone with a car, or take your bike, or order a taxi, which is of course expensive. People are scared of being filmed. I'll try if I can film a few bikes. They're quiet. Some people came really prepared. I've been at this border crossing now for almost 2 hours, and it's very cold here up in the mountains. So I think I'm gonna give up. No one was willing to speak to me on camera, but we could speak off camera. I'm freezing, so I'm gonna switch to people back to Tbilisi. So amazing day. Even though I couldn't speak to anyone on camera, I could speak with people off camera. And actually I offered these two guys a ride back to Tbilisi. I had the drivers anyway, so I was going back to Tbilisi. I had two back seats still open. And I met this guy. He was afraid of the camera, actually. Like you'll see at the end of the story, I'll change the details about these two guys, but I'm gonna tell their story as best I can. Second-hand story, but whatever. You can trust me. These two guys were from south of Russia, pretty close to Crimea, but still Russia. Educated guys. One spoke English, one didn't. And they explained to me how everything worked and how their day had been. It was 24 hours from they had been traveling until I met them. And so 28 hours they've been traveling in total. And just their story was amazing. So I met one of them first, the one that didn't speak English, and he lost his friend. He didn't know where he was. What happened is they went by car to the border, but there's a traffic jam of about the estimated 60 kilometers traffic jam on the Russian side of the border. And what they do, what I just figured out now, why there's a traffic jam with trucks on the Georgian side of the border, is because of they just took both lanes. There's two lanes. One goes towards Russia, one goes towards Georgia, and the Russian 60 kilometer traffic jam is just both lanes. That's why all the traffic jam, the trucks were also stopped at the Georgian side, because they couldn't go through either. So a 60-kilometer traffic jam on the border, you can imagine that will take days, probably more than 7 days to wait in the car. So they didn't go by car, because they expect the border actually to close pretty soon, because that's just crazy. So what they did is their friend that drove them there went back with the car, and they had these electric scooters, and they passed the queue, the 60-kilometer whatever, the road by electric scooter. Then you could come to the customs office. You can't pass that by scooter or walk, so you have to either by car or by bike. Now there are some smart, I guess, people that are there trading bikes or cars or whatever. So they traded their electric scooters, which were together, I guess, around 900 euros, they said, something like that, for two like rusty old bikes that barely worked. But they got them to the next check, which then is like the military police, which is gonna check if you're not escaping the military, which of course everyone is. And this is where it gets more complicated, because in Russia you got the 1-year conscription for everyone, except if you do this other thing, which is if you're a student, you do once a week specialized thing, which is a little bit part of your education, but it doesn't have to be. So one of these guys is an architect. So he was during his education was also educated for military responsibility for like infrastructure, bridges, and that kind of stuff. So he was actually then you're a reservist officer in like specialized in bridges. And if you have that, then you don't have to do the 1-year conscription, which in Russia basically means that you just do stuff for the rich Russians, or you clean parks, or you, apparently the meme is you green the grass, you paint the grass green. that is one of the memes about Russian military conscription. But if you study, like these guys, architect and a computer scientist, then you don't have to do that, but you have to do this other thing, which is specialized in something. One of them is like specialized in bridges and stuff, and the other one would be like an explosive expert or something, explosive clearing expert. So then you are technically, if you finish your studies and this military university program, which everyone has to do, or you have to do the 1 year, then you are a reservist officer. But these guys, the reservist officers and stuff, they don't have to go in the army yet. For now, the pool of people that are now sent to the army, like mandatory, is the people that did the 1 year thing. Both these guys didn't, so they can still leave the country, technically, if you pass the 60-kilometer thing. And then the next barrier is you have to talk to these border police or whatever they are. And they, of course, scare you into paying them bribes. So one of them, anyway, they're just screaming, apparently they're just screaming at you from all sides. You traitor, and going to Tbilisi and stuff. And it's just screaming, a lot of screaming, and you're put in rooms and they're separated, and you have to give your passport, of course, so that already is kind of scary. Guess you can't go back or forth. You don't have any more water or food after that 60-kilometer hike or scooter trip, and if you have been in the car, which they've met people that were still 2 kilometers from the border in car, and they were already there for 3 days. So imagine if you're now just getting into the 60-kilometer traffic jam, and then still you have no guarantee that you're gonna get through. So anyway, then you have to go from the military border to another border office. I don't know why. So one of these guys bribed the border office with 10,000 rubles, which is about 180 euros, which for that area of Russia is almost a monthly salary. So these officers are, these border officers are getting shit rich, of course. And that's always a little bit what I saw when I did the way to Tbilisi, you of course see all the Russian cars coming towards you. And I saw just Porsches and all these German cars, whatever, and just nice cars. I was like, why are all these nice cars coming from Russia? But of course, it's just, you have to bribe police and wait 60 kilometers, but still. The other guy had this lucky thing that he was in Armenia 2 weeks ago to find a house already, Yerevan. And he was planning, actually, so he found a house 2 weeks ago. He was flying back to Russia to get his girlfriend and his stuff. And then was gonna move to Yerevan in 3 days. But he thought, fuck, it's probably gonna be too late. In 3 days they're gonna close the border, or you never know. So we have to go now. So luckily he had this flight ticket that he was going to fly back and forth to Yerevan. So he just pretended that he was going to travel to Yerevan by bike or whatever, and then fly back. And it's also the reason why I can't tell you his identity, because of course they note this down and they said, if you're not back by when his flight ticket was, you're doing an illegal thing, and on that illegal thing, which is not going to the army, is 10 years in prison. I can't tell you about the one guy because he bribed the officers, and I can't tell you about the other guy because he's not going to be back in Russia in a week or two, whenever his ticket was. And you saw these guys were just like they had been up for 24 hours when I spoke to them. And when we were doing the car ride, and you saw their eyes like full of adrenaline and telling me these stories. And they hadn't seen each other because they were separated from the first border. So they hadn't seen each other either and it was just so much stress, like you can imagine. And it was just so funny, like they told their stories and then they just fell asleep in the car on like the worst roads. You can't be. I was very uncomfortable even in the front seat, so they were very uncomfortable, I guess, but they fell asleep immediately. You just saw all that desperation in the people's eyes that I saw like coming out of there, and they survived a big ordeal, which I think they did. Especially if you came without a car, and if you waited a week in the queue on the other side. In the car, you're probably also tired, but I didn't see these people because they stayed in their car, of course, and they just immediately drove off. I couldn't speak to these people. But the people that came by feet, yeah, they were just very happy, and you saw them just struggling. After they've probably bought a bike for 900 euros. They bought a bike for that little piece. You have to have a bike for that little piece of land. Then if you cross the last Russian border, you have to walk, or if you have a bike still, but you probably don't, because what you actually did to these guys, they traded that electric scooter for the bikes, which is like 900 euro scooters for just 2 Russian bikes. Then they went into the second office, and then their bikes were stolen again, of course. So yeah, it's just all out bribery and stealing on that side of the border. But they were so happy to be on this side, but tired, and hopefully they don't ever have to go back to military service or to Russia even. It was an experience. So that's my story from today. Hope to see you in the next video.